You know, it's kind of wild to think about. But right now, inside you, there are literally trillions of tiny, bustling cities at work. And that's exactly what we're going to explore. The cell. But we're not going to look at it as some simple blob of jelly. No, we're going to see it for what it really is. A microscopic metropolis, the fundamental architect of our entire existence.
Okay, so let's start our tour of this cellular city. Here's our roadmap for the journey. We'll start with the foundational laws that govern it, check out its infrastructure, and then see what happens when things, unfortunately, go wrong.
All right, first up, the blueprint. Think about it, right? Every city is built on a set of core principles, a sort of constitution that dictates how it's formed and how it's supposed to run. Well, the city inside us is no different.
This simple Latin phrase, omnis cellula e cellula, was a complete game changer back in the 19th century. It just means all cells from cells. And it was Rudolf Virchow's profound way of saying that life doesn't just, poof, appear out of thin air. Every single cell in your body is a part of this incredible, unbroken chain that stretches all the way back to the very first life on Earth.
And that one idea, that simple observation, became the foundation for what we call cell theory. This is the master blueprint for our city. It establishes the first, most important law. Every living thing, from a tiny bacterium to you and me, is built from these basic units. I mean, this is literally the bedrock of all modern biology.
So a blueprint is one thing, but a city needs actual physical structure. You know, roads, bridges, support beams. So what's holding our little cellular city together? What provides its framework?
Well, that would be the cytoskeleton, but don't picture some rigid, fixed scaffold here. Oh no, it's this incredibly dynamic network of protein fibers. It's constantly being built up and broken down, acting as both the city's internal skeleton and its massive transportation system.
And this infrastructure isn't just made of one thing. It's a super sophisticated mix. First, you've got these thin microfilaments, which are like the city's tension-bearing support cables. Then there are the intermediate filaments. Think of those as the solid building foundations, anchoring everything in place. And finally, you have the big guns, microtubules. They're the city's main highways and structural girders, keeping the whole thing from collapsing.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the systems that keep the lights on and the information flowing. A city is pretty useless without power and a way to communicate. And believe me, that's just as true at the cellular level.
So meet the mitochondria, the undisputed power plants of our cellular city. These tiny organelles are just constantly working, taking in fuel like sugars and fats and converting it into something called ATP. The easiest way to think of ATP is like the electricity of the cell. It's the universal energy currency that powers just about every single thing the cell does.
And that, of course, raises a really critical question. If every part of the city relies on this power, what happens when there's a blackout? A failure in the grid would be catastrophic. And in our bodies, it really truly is. When these power plants start to fail, it can lead to devastating disorders like Murph syndrome. And the symptoms really show you just how vital this power grid is. You see things like myoclonus, which are these sudden, jarring muscle twitches, and ataxia, which are problems with balance, all alongside this just crushing fatigue. It makes sense, right? The parts of our body that are the biggest energy hogs, our brains and our muscles, they get hit the hardest. A power failure in the cellular city has devastating consequences for the whole organism.
Now, beyond just power, any thriving city needs a sophisticated communication network. Cells are constantly being bombarded with signals from all over, from their neighbors, from the wider environment, and they need a way to interpret and respond to all those messages.
So this communication usually happens through something called a signaling cascade. It's basically a chain reaction. It all starts when a signal molecule, think of it like a letter, arrives at a receptor on the cell's surface. This kicks off a relay race inside, where the message gets passed down a chain of proteins, and it often gets amplified along the way. Finally, this whole relay leads to a specific response, telling the cell exactly what it needs to do, whether that's to move, to grow, or to totally change its function.
A city is so much more than just its buildings and roads. It's the people, right? It's the citizens who have all these specialized jobs. Well, our body is exactly the same. It's made up of this incredibly diverse population of cells, and each one is an expert in its field. You see, every single specialized cell in our body started out as a stem cell. Kind of like a jack of all trades, with the potential to become almost anything. But then, through a process called differentiation, these cells get their career paths chosen for them, developing unique structures to perform a very specific function.
I mean, take epithelial cells, for example.
These guys are the city's border guards, its factory workers, and its sanitation engineers all rolled into one. They form the protective layer of our skin, they absorb nutrients in our intestines, they secrete hormones in our glands, and they filter waste in our kidneys. They are true specialists at work.
So, the big question is, with all these specialized workers, how do you go from a single-celled settlement to a sprawling metropolis of trillions? Well, it all happens through this beautifully controlled process of replication.
And that process is called mitosis. It's this elegant, almost dance-like mechanism that lets one cell become two, making absolutely sure that each new daughter cell gets a perfect, identical copy of the original genetic blueprint. This is how we grow, how we heal, and how we maintain our bodies every single day.
And the process is incredibly organized. In the very first stage, called prophase, all those long, stringy strands of DNA, the blueprints, are meticulously packed and condensed down into these tight, visible chromosomes. It's kind of like a moving company carefully boxing up all your furniture before splitting the contents between two new homes. It's just brilliant.
But, like any complex metropolis, things can and definitely do go wrong. Infrastructure can decay, power grids can fail, communication lines can break down. And in our cellular city, these failures are what lead to disease.
And just to really appreciate what can go wrong, we first have to grasp the sheer scale of it all. We're talking about more than 200 different types of specialized cells in our bodies. That's over 200 different professions in our city. And with that much complexity, well, the number of potential points of failure is absolutely immense.
And perhaps the most catastrophic failure of all is when that fundamental law of controlled growth, mitosis, is completely ignored. This is what leads to cancer. It's a state where the city's own citizens start to multiply without restraint, basically rebelling against the very laws that are supposed to govern them.
So let's bring this all together. Remember those specialized epithelial cells we talked about, the city's workers? Well, adenocarcinoma, a cancer of those exact cells, is responsible for a staggering 96% of all colorectal cancers. It's just a stark, powerful reminder of how a breakdown in one specific population of workers can threaten the entire metropolis.
And that leaves us with one final thought to ponder. This intricate living city that exists inside each and every one of us is the architect of our health, of our very lives. So if understanding its complex systems is the key to well-being, then perhaps the greatest secrets for the future of medicine lie in understanding exactly how and why it fails.